All right. I think we can go ahead and get started. So what we will be talking about today is treatment structure and the data that we take. All right. So throughout this week, we've learned a wide variety of different kind of topic areas, and I think the question that parents ask us the most and they want to see the most is, oh, how are actual treatment sessions ran? So we'll get to exactly like, oh, how the sessions are structured, but we're going to talk really about the underlying principles or the underlying reasons why we have that structure in place. So whenever we start with the client, the most important thing that we have to do is gain control. And almost without exception, almost every one of the kids that we've ever worked with, when you take a look at how the family is and what the family does, you can easily tell the child has all the control in that family. And to a certain extent, it didn't matter how old the child was, that when you take a look at everything, oh, mom and dad and the family would do a lot of things differently if the child didn't control them. So how does this child kind of gain control in a household? Okay, how does that happen? Well, most of the time, it's through all of their inappropriate maladaptive behaviors, the crying, the screaming, the hitting themselves, the throwing themselves on the ground. All of these kind of behaviors are methods that they use to gain control over the family. So parents make a lot of changes in their everyday lives to avoid these type of behaviors because these behaviors scare them. They are worried about them. And so that's how the child establishes control, is that, hey, you better do this for me. Otherwise, I will engage in these behaviors which you will not like. So the most important thing to structure is this, oh, how can we make sure that the parents are in control? When we go in and we work with the child, how is the therapist in control? Now, when you actually take a look at all kids, all kids try to gain control over the environments, that's what all kids strive to do, is they want to have that control. When you take a look at the kids that actually have control over their environments, what you'll find is that those kids generally are not as happy. Okay, they're just not as happy. Why? Because, oh, I know in order to get something, I have to engage in these problematic behaviors. So if I want this, then this is how I get it. Okay, I get it through tantrums. I get it through aggression. I get it through all of these inappropriate types of behaviors, okay? Which means that, oh, throughout my day, my job is to get things that I want. So throughout my day, I'm going to engage in all of these inappropriate behaviors to get those things that I want. So a healthy family structure is one where the parents are in control and that they give choices to their kids, okay? But those are choices based on the parents, not based on a child's behaviors. Now, the problem with control is that when somebody has control, they don't want to give it up, And so when you take a look at the kids that we work with, in general, they're the king of the house. They are catered to. They get the things that they want. Parents do things for them. So this is their kingdom. And no child is going to give up their kingdom without a fight. Okay? So you should expect that, oh, once we try to take this control away from the child, it's normal. It's absolutely normal to expect all of these behaviors that they engage in to get a lot worse before they'll get better. Because as we take away the control, they are fighting to keep that control. So by and far, the hardest part of the treatment process is in handling the child's behaviors, being able to tolerate their crying and really understand, like, oh, all of the behaviors that they demonstrate today are productive for them, meaning like, oh, the more that we can get them to protest, to aggress, to do all these things, and for them to learn that none of these behaviors will get them what they want, the better it is for their long-term future. So tackling behaviors is challenging because nobody wants to see their child cry. Nobody wants to see them engage in worse and worse behaviors, you know, even some behaviors that they haven't seen before. Nobody wants to see that. Okay. And it's really challenging because it hurts to see your child go through some of these type of behaviors that they go through. But ultimately, it's for their benefit that they go through these type of behaviors, because over the long term, they'll learn not to engage in these. Now, the other thing that makes it hard to tackle the behaviors is that you have to be very consistent with doing something, okay? Once you start requiring the child to do things, you have to make sure that every single day, every single moment, whenever the child engages in that behavior, you have to do the right things, you know? There's not, oh, let me take this time off, or, oh, okay, I just won't address that behavior right now. Because every time you don't address the behavior, you're teaching the child actually to persist in staying with that behavior, because there's always a chance for the child to be, oh, you know what? There's a chance mom and dad will not follow through. There's a chance that they won't. And when you give them the chance, the behavior stays around for longer periods of time, and it makes it more difficult to get rid of. All right. So now a question that I often get asked is, oh, you know, my spouse and I, we have different styles of parenting, you know, like, oh, I like to explain things. My husband likes to do this, or my wife likes to do this other thing. Like, what is the right thing to do, you know? And at the heart of it, the style is the least important part of what you do. The follow through is the most important part of what you do. So it doesn't matter if you yell at the child or you whisper to the child. It's whether or not whatever you told the child, you're going to make them do. Okay. So the most important part with the control is that, oh, it doesn't matter how you deliver something. The most important part is in being able to follow through. And, oh, when you tell the child something, that the child can trust that whatever you're going to tell them that you're going to do, you're going to follow through with. All right, so that's the basis for how we're going to create the structure to help this child, okay? Because one, the child has control, and we need to make sure that they don't have that control, that we have the control. And so when we take a look at treatment, well, when we provide treatment, we always start at in the house. Okay, we start at home. Why? Because that's when you have the most control. That's where you can control a lot of different factors that you can't control when you're out in the community. So when you go out into the community and you're trying to establish control in the community, if you don't have control at home, there's a very, very high likelihood that you will absolutely not be able to control the child in the community. So all treatment starts at home. You build skills at home. And then when they're listening to you, then you extend that control out into the community. Now, that's not to say you can't start in the community. You can start anywhere. But what we're talking about is, oh, what is going to make it the easiest, fastest way to gain that control? All right, so now even when you're looking at, okay, I have control at home and then I'm going to extend it out to the community, you are still planning about how to establish control or how to build skills with the child. Okay? That means like, oh, I know that I'm having difficulties with the child at a grocery store, you know? And so, oh, okay, let me practice some of those skills at home. Practice walking with me, practice doing those things, you know? Once you get good with that, then you can go to a grocery store. But then you want to pick and choose the right time of day to do it. Choose a part of time of the day where it's not so busy. Choose a location that's easy for you to manage, okay? And then when you go there, your only goal of going there is to teach this child that particular skill or that control. So when you actually go to the store, your job is not to, oh, I have all these chores I need to do. I need to pick up this and I need to pick up that. No, you go with this to the store with the only goal of established control, getting this child to learn and to listen to you in that environment. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about our treatment structure here in the US so that you kind of understand like, okay, what that treatment structure looks like, you know, how do we run in terms of, whenever we have a client, what does the structure actually look like? So a child that's usually with us has intensive hours, meaning they're anywhere from 35 to 40 hours a week of one-to-one training. So all those hours are provided by behavior therapists that go to the child's home for 3.5 hours in duration to work with that particular child. So Monday through Saturday, the child is usually getting about 2 sessions a day. So one in the morning. So Monday morning, they'll have somebody come out. Monday afternoon, they might have a different therapist come. Tuesday morning, a different therapist, and then Tuesday afternoon. And so the whole week then is comprised of different therapists coming over to the house to work with that child. So this team of therapists that work with a particular child is to facilitate the child's generalization across different people, across different personalities. So in order for this team of therapists to really maximally help this child, then everybody on the team needs to have the same game plan, the same targets, the same expectations. And so that we can all, when we're deciding, okay, we're going to help this child improve, we're all pushing this child in the same direction. So every client then has a weekly team meeting where all the team members get together and we talk about the child's progress. We take a look at all the numbers that we take, all the data that we take, and we then make determinations about, how best to proceed with treatment. Okay? And then that's how we get the entire team together in sync with everybody, you know, and the team is composed of all these therapists as well as the supervisor and the parents so that everybody really knows exactly what is going on. All right, so when we take a look at this team and unified approach to treatment, then, you know, we have parents involved, and parent involvement is one of the most critical things to treatment. And so not only are parents involved in these team meetings that we have, the supervisor also meets with the parents weekly to go over what's going on with their child, to answer any questions, and especially to give them techniques, give them skill sets that they themselves can use when interacting with their kids. Now, in treatment sessions, when a child has learned a particular skill, when we've actually taught them to wait or to do this behavior, to do that behavior, once they've learned it with us, then we transfer that skill set over to parents. So that, during treatment sessions, the therapist will have the parent come over, they'll talk them through how to get their child to do something, and then they'll provide feedback and assistance for them to be successful at getting their child to wait or getting their child to put on their shoes and their socks and those kind of things. And so that's also incorporated as a part of treatment. So that's what the therapist will do. They'll go in, they'll get the child, they'll go to that room. Okay. And in that room, we have a logbook. So like a binder with all of the skills that we're working with the child on, you know, all the things we're teaching the child. And so it's our main communication source from one therapist to another so that we all know, where is the child in their learning with this particular skill or that particular skill. So the therapist will review the data in the logbook. They'll see what how well the child's been overall responding, and then they'll plan for their session, which means that, if I know from the previous therapist, like, the child's had a rough couple of days and they've struggled with some things, this therapist might plan to, let me start the session off with something fun, something easier for them to do to get them on the right track. So as the therapist is reviewing this data, then what they have already done is they've structured something for the child to engage in, whether it be a toy that they play or an activity that they're having them do, they'll just have them do it. But it's an activity they already know how to do, or something that they don't need a lot of supervision on, that the therapist can just go ahead and, I can read up on what I'm doing while the child still remains productive in what they're doing. So the therapist will then decide on a program, a skill that they're going to work on for that session. They'll look up the information, see where the last therapist was able to take the child. What difficulties did they have? And then they'll get ready to run that program, whether it's by, getting the stimuli that they need, or whatever learning materials. They're going to get all that stuff ready to begin teaching. Now, when they're all ready, they'll call the child over and engage in the teaching. So whatever they need help on, the therapist will help them out. However they need to be successful, they'll facilitate them being successful until the child can demonstrate some level of independence with what we're asking them to do. Once they're done with that, then the therapist will either let them go play if they have play skills, or if they don't, the therapist will set out a toy or an activity for them to do, and the therapist will help them through that activity. So after they help them with this activity, the therapist will give the child just some downtime for them to rest while they write up the information about, what did I teach? How did I teach it? How well did the child do? So that the next therapist knows what to do in their sitting. Now, all of the skills, all the programs that we work on have already been designed by the supervisor. So the supervisor has already decided, these are the list of items that we're going to be teaching with this child. And the behavior therapist's job is to go in there and to teach each of these skill sets, moving it and advancing it from one therapist to the next. So the programs themselves have already been devised for the therapist to run, meaning it's already been decided, how much language we should use in this program to teach this child. How are we breaking down this complex or difficult skill so that the child has an easier and faster time learning it? Okay. All of those considerations have already been made by the supervisor before therapists even run the program. So when therapists call the child over to learn a particular skill, the method of teaching and the structure of that teaching has already been determined, and that they are carrying out that teaching with the idea that I know where the child was the last time another therapist worked with them, and my job is to take them from that point and move them forward, and then to effectively communicate to the next therapist, what was I able to advance with this child, so the next therapist is able to carry that forward. So when the therapist calls the child over, they've already planned for how they're going to run that sitting, and their job is to try to keep that sitting as short and as successful as possible when the child is doing their best, when they're trying their best, when they're giving the most effort at that task. The therapist's job is to make sure that, we give you enough help to be successful. We're able to get you independent and out of the chair and out with this task as soon as we possibly can. However, if the child is engaging in inappropriate maladaptive behaviors, they're screaming, they're crying, they're resisting, they're doing all of these kind of things, then the therapist's job is to make sure that these behaviors don't get what the child wants. So if the child wants to stop doing the work, the therapists follow through, make sure they are able to complete the work, and that it doesn't matter how long it takes, the therapist has to continue to target it until the child listens to them. So we train every therapist to make sure that they can follow through and handle all the behaviors that the child is likely to demonstrate. Okay? And that all therapists know that it doesn't matter what their scheduled time is. It doesn't matter if like, oh, you know what? It's 5 minutes until I'm done. Okay, and then I have another client that I need to go to. It doesn't matter if what time it is. If the child is still engaging in these behaviors, the therapist has to stay there and see it through until the child is no longer protesting and is listening to whatever the therapist has asked them to do. Now, when the child is actually listening to us, then that's how session runs, is that, oh, the therapist prepares for a program, they'll call a child over, teach that skill, whatever it may be, and then have the child play. If they can play by themselves, we let them play. If not, then we teach them to play with a particular toy. Then the child will have some downtime as we write up notes on the program that we taught, as well as the toy play that we worked on. So this basic format is the format that runs throughout the 3.5 hours that the therapist is there with the child. Now, as a part of every child's program, certain programs are designed to take the child outside of the house or outside of these skill sets that we're teaching indoors, okay? So we might be teaching the child how to play with a wide variety of balls. So in the US, we teach them baseball, basketball, football, soccer. We might teach them how to ride a scooter, ride a skateboard, ride a bike. We might teach them how to play video games and do those kind of things, you know? And so as a part of that program then, oh, when we're in the room or we're teaching all of these skills, for every about 45 minutes of that, then we take a 10 to 15 minute break away from that room to teach these skills outside or to work on these other types of skill sets. And so one of the most important parts of doing the therapy itself is understanding patience, you know, because it takes time for kids to learn things. It takes time to build a good foundation for them for future learning. And you have to be very deliberate in how you're teaching stuff, when you advance things, how much you push a child, and how much you advance a child. And so that's one of the most important factors, is making sure that therapists aren't expecting, oh, today, right now, you have to learn what I have to teach you. It doesn't matter how hard you struggle. It doesn't matter. You're going to learn it. That's the wrong mindset to take in. What we train all therapists to do is to go at the child's pace. Let the child's behaviors and their progress help determine how fast and how quickly you move from one step to the other to the next step. So this is the balance that needs to be achieved in treatment, which is we have to teach fast enough so the child doesn't get bored with the material, because, oh, just like with regular kids, if you put a regular kid in a classroom that doesn't challenge them, that it's very boring for them, they know all the things already, those kids have behaviors in that class. They'll act out because they're bored. And in the same way, when we're teaching our kids, we have to be very deliberate about the pacing that we set, that we have to challenge the child enough without it being overly challenging, and to progress at a level that just moves them along without staying too long at a certain stage, because they will get bored. And once they get bored, they'll engage in other inappropriate behaviors. So in the same way, we have to make sure that we're not teaching too fast for the child. Okay? Meaning that, oh, we're trying to just push and advance and advance and advance skill sets without the child truly understanding or knowing one step before you advance to the next step. Because what tends to happen is that when you're teaching something new, the child's just learning it. And when you try to advance it too quickly, the child's not ready for those additional steps because this step still isn't as secure as they need it to be to build additional steps on top of. So when you push too hard, too fast, then it might all come crumbling down on you. Why? Because it's too difficult for the child. When it's too difficult for the child's going to be more resistant to learning. The more resistant they are to learning, the more these inappropriate behaviors come up because, oh, I don't want to do this work because it's too hard for me. And then that's when you'll backslide a lot in terms of what the child's doing when you advance things and try to push things beyond where they're able to handle at that moment. Okay, so generally that's how treatment goes, how treatment sessions go. You know, they go to the house, they get the teaching going, they go through this cycle of teaching inside the room where they get the program set up, they'll teach the program, they'll have the child play, they'll take notes, and then, you know, for every 45 minutes of doing that, then they might go outside to teach additional skills outside, they come back in, they'll take notes on those skill sets, they'll work on other skill sets, and that's how most of sessions are run. All right, so now throughout my descriptions here, I've talked about taking data quite a bit. And here in the US, we pay a lot of attention to the taking of the data. We train our staff how to do it. You know, we're very thorough in terms of the data taking, you know, and that, you know, we will occasionally come across situations where parents like, oh, do you need to take so much data? Like, oh, you guys take data on literally everything, you know, do you need to take that much data? Wouldn't my child be benefited more by you doing more with my child and not taking the same amount of time taking the data? So when we're looking at treatment decisions, like, oh, what are we going to do with this child? Oh, what difficulties are they having? What are they struggling with? We have to be good about identifying those things. Otherwise, when we aren't good at identifying it, we're just guessing about what's going on. We're just making assumptions about what's going on. And just like when you go see a medical doctor, when you have something going wrong with you, you don't want the doctor just to guess. Yeah, I think it's this, you know. You want them to like, oh, okay, let's run some tests. Let's make sure before we make decisions about what to do, before we operate on you, we should find out exactly what's going right or what's going wrong and what are the things we need to do, you know? And so that's the importance of data, is that data are the tests by which we determine how we're going to proceed with something. Now, not only do we stress the taking of the data, but we also stress the taking of accurate data, okay? And so the thing is that, you know, there's a lot of times when people make mistakes when they're writing things down, you know? And that for us, in order for us to accurately identify when things are going wrong and how we can fix those things, the data actually has to be representative. So just like, oh, when you have tests done with a medical doctor, you don't want the doctor to be making decisions about your treatment when they receive some other patient's records, you know, that they're basing off of inaccurate data for the treatment. So when we take good, consistent, accurate data, then we can analyze the data and pick out patterns in what's going on. We can pick out patterns in how the child learns. We can pick out patterns in what the child doesn't learn or what the child struggles with, so that it gives you insight into particular areas that then you can make adjustments to treatment to address those areas. When you take good, accurate data, you can check patterns in their behaviors, like, oh, when does this child protest? How often do they protest? With who they protest? What is the person doing that they're protesting with? All that information gives you insight and gives you an ability to figure out what's going wrong. So if you have a child that's like, oh, you know what, every session at about 5 o'clock, that's when they start to protest. Then you start to take a look. Oh, are they getting more tired at that time? Are they hungrier at that time? If it is one of those factors, then you can make adjustments to therapy to quickly alleviate the problem. Now, good, accurate data also allows us to identify errors in teaching. So like, oh, when the child's not learning something, one, we want to make sure it's not our fault, that, oh, how we're teaching or the methods that we're using or the specific teaching strategies that one therapist is using is ineffective, And so when we take a look at the data, we can see, oh, when a newer therapist is working, I can see how they're targeting something. I can see through the data what they're targeting, how they're working through something, and then I can identify what they're doing wrong from the data. Now, the most important thing about the data, though, is that you have to understand the data that you're taking, because it doesn't matter if you're taking a wide variety of data. If you don't understand any of it, it's useless to you, And so the data is meant to support treatment. It's meant to support treatment because it gives you insights into what's going on. And that then when you make treatment decisions about what to do with the child, it's really based on good, informed information about what the child's doing or not doing. All right, so that's pretty much our discussion on connecting the structure of how we run therapy in the U.S. and the rationale why and the importance of data. Does anybody have any questions about anything that we've gone over? All right, well, thanks everybody for joining me again. Hopefully everything has been informative, and I'll see everybody next time.